3 minutes past 10 on this 10th day of September. You're just in time for Press Pass. My name is Mark Masai. This is what's coming up.
This is the first day I interviewed Sharon. On this day I took several of these photos, and I took photos of WhatsApp conversations.
Sharon's murder, a story that is very sensitive to tell. Was this a case of media intimidation as well? We'll discuss this at length during this episode.
As he narrated the story to us, that's when we started understanding that it was related to his work.
And in the backstory, we'll learn what happened behind the scenes after the escape of journalist Erick Odour.
Watu wa kaseti, you have to do something about it because enye mnaeka headlines na enye mnatupia huko ndani hailingani kabisa.
Yale tunaona kwa magazeti na TV na radio yanaandamana.
Views on the news, we will have a candid response from the readers on the headlines that they receive. Just before we start with that commentary over there from different counties on the headlines that people receive on the dailies, let me give a quick introduction of our guest tonight. Very honored to have in our panel the H.O.D. of the Media and Film Studies at the Daystar University, Dr. Wamunyu, and has been a teacher of my wife as well. So a lot of respect to you. She has turned out very well, I must say. And next to her is Secretary General of the Kenyan Union of Journalists, Erick Odour, not a stranger to this panel, and of course a lot from him to be said about what's happening in terms of intimidation to the journalists in this country. And my senior in the profession has been a colleague at the China Global Television Network and also has been here at the Daily Nation years back. It's standard as well, yes, years back. That is Douglas Okwatch, a journalist par excellence, and next to him Henry Maina, who has been here as well as a reporter at the Daily Nation years back. I think I was still in high school. He's now the regional director of the Article 19 East African chapter. So let's get some quick responses from people on what they think about the headlines. Many times the fourth estate is blamed for running with sensational headlines that end up not having a strong story to it. We saw people's opinion on the same. This is what they had to say.
You find that the headlines, it's capturing or it's captivating, but inside there's actually nothing. Just a waste of time. Maybe just sell the paper, the agenda, or the idea, but no content at all.
Wakati mwingine unaona headline ni kubwa, lakini ukipekua huko ndani tajiriba yake inashangaza. Kwa hivyo mrekebishe wale ambao wana research. Wawe serious. Katika vyombo vya habari, yale tunaona kwa magazeti na TV na radio yanaandamana.
For me, maneno ya kaseti naweza sema sana sana wanaweza eka headline, but if you go in usome hizo vitu yenye iko ndani haiendani sambamba kabisa na ile yenye wameweka kwa headline. Lakini sana sana kwa TV huwa wanaweka headlines na baadaye ukikuja kusikia news inakuanga ukweli. So for me nasema radio na TV inakuanga ukweli, but sana sana watu wa kaseti, you have to do something about it because enye mnaeka headlines na enye mnatupia huko ndani hailingani kabisa.
Tapata gazeti kuanzia Monday to Friday, Sharon, gazeti from Monday to Friday, Ruta this, Ruta that. So tunaonanga most of the time hizi gazeti huwa zina dictate na huwa zina mislead. For example, at times utakuta zile information huwa zinaandikwa hapo, zingine si ukweli.
Kama hii mambo ilikuwa juzi ya NYS, kulingana na vile imeandikwa na vile unawajua na vile unaona ni two different things kabisa. Hapo sasa ninaona hapo ni vizuri wanaingia kwa grassroots, wanaingia chini kwa ground, wanafanya uchunguzi wao kwanza before waweke headlines ya kitu.
In the recent past events, there is a newspaper that put a headline on a different day. They put a headline that the university student Sharon Otieno, it's true she had been murdered. So they gave a headline that she was just a student and she was not in any kind of relationship. And then going to the following day, you find that the same newspaper wrote a headline again saying that the lady was married and she was a wife to somebody with 3 kids. So you see, such kind of news are misleading to the public. So you people in media should first of all research and get the true information before you give a headline.
Ningeomba pia wale waandishi wa gazeti wakati wanaandika magazeti wawe wanaelezea watu ile kitu ambacho ni cha kweli, ndiposa mwananchi naye awe ana ule ufahamu wa kile kitu kinaendelea katika nchi.
Uzapata headlines zimeandikwa kumbe ni kitu kingine, uzapata habari zimeandikwa kumbe ni kitu kingine. Sasa sabini inaleta joto kwenye masuala ya media. Tafahamu hata kwenye nchi pia sababisha pia kuleta mambo mengine, habari ambazo zinatofautisha.
A frequent reader of your newspapers. I'm also watching your TV stations, and I'm very happy with the way you are presenting headlines and highlighting issues.
Mambo ya headline ya gazeti yatakikana usome gazeti pamoja na uone TV, ujue yani kama ni kamili, alafu unalinganisha so that you know the truth.
Some good responses there and opinions from the people on what they think about our headlines. And this is a general issue, but I'll make it more specific in a bit, but just to get quick reactions from my panel, from what they've heard on the expectations, from what they see on the headlines. And I mean, you train people on a daily to come up with good headlines. And, you know, of course, it's about captivating people. But from what you hear, is there any surprise that they receive what they receive on a daily basis?
Yes, I'm actually very surprised. There seems to be a very big credibility gap that the press has compared to the work that they're doing. And I think for the most part, you know, I think the press does a pretty good job. So it's very interesting to listen to our audiences and to hear that there's a sense of we really don't get what we think we are going to get. Okay. So that's a bit of a concern.
All right. Yourself, Eric?
Yes, Mike, what I'll say is that I think there are 2 angles to it. Number one, obviously, it's true that we've had headlines that actually do not correspond with the story. But I'll defend the paper I work for because part of my work is to write headlines. So I'll say
East
that.
African.
Yes, I'll say that when you are looking at a story as an editor, you look at the first paragraph up to the last paragraph. Once you've read through, that is when you come up with a headline that actually captures everything. Mm-hmm. So I'll say that for the paper I work for, actually we do not write headlines that are misleading. We do not write headlines that are promising, but there is nothing in the story.
Okay.
That's what I'll say for now.
Douglas, you've been in the business as well, coming up with headlines, but you're also on the other side of consuming a lot of what we have in the dailies, and you have a lot to say about it on a weekly basis.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. I think listening to those statements, I get the sense that Kenyans are very perceptive.
Yes.
And it's dangerous to take them for a ride. You cannot take Kenyans for a ride. Mm. And those statements are a brutal indictment of the media, the way the media conducts its business. Mm. They are a wake-up call, and I think they are calling out on the media to step out of their laurels, yes, and do a good job. They are telling us actually to stop this, what Americans call cotton candy journalism.
Right.
Just hollow, you know, big, flashy, you know, attractive. But when you go inside, they can actually explain that they find nothing.
Right.
So that is really a cause for concern.
Wow. Been told to get off our butts. I don't know if you're you have the same sentiments there, Henry.
Yeah, I think there are 2 things that have come from those comments. One is that Kenyans read, so let's not take them for granted. I think there's been a history, people arguing that Kenyans don't read. But from this, it's very clear that Kenyans read. But 2, that there is a challenge, especially on headlines for stories that run for more than 1 day.
Yes.
So the example that the first day you might not have a complete story, but you decided to run with it, and therefore the headline was written as if you had a complete set of facts, even though you then promised that this is a continuing story, and we are still delving as much into it. So I think struggle now is how do we keep the headlines, which must help us sell, but at the same time give us much information, even where the story is still unfolding.
Right.
And that's a big challenge, because most Kenyans would read perhaps the first 3 or 4 paras, and they don't find those paras telling them as much as the headline had said, and therefore they give up. Perhaps you've turned and tucked it in on page 3 somewhere else, and they don't get there because they are feeling that the first few paragraphs haven't been as substantive as the headline portrayed it. So it's a wake-up call, as Douglas says, that we need to understand that perceptive Kenyans would hold us to account on what we promise.
And there's a reason why I bring it up, and we're getting to Barack Odour, the story, and also as well that ended up in the unfortunate murder of Sharon Otieno. But first, on this particular headline here that I believe you can be able to see if you mirror what I'm looking at. This is a Daily Nation edition of Monday, August 27th, and it started the whole issue of coverage on the corruption allegations against the DCJ. On this first day, it was broken, I believe, by the Daily Nation. Top judge to be arrested over sleaze, and you see what is there in the sub line there. And now the responses were many, and the team at the Daily Nation felt that it was necessary for at least that they could give an explanation of why they gave the approach they gave in their stories. And Mutuma Matthew, the executive editor in charge of the daily editions here at the Nation Media Group, wrote this opinion piece here, and he said, good journalism will still win despite hordes of keyboarders. First of all, I'm not too sure if you followed the reactions to the breaking of the story on the DCJ, and of course, you know, the powerful office that it is, and sometimes people might get emotive about this and feel that the nation is being used by the sources that are informing it to hit at the judiciary. And in your view, first of all, from what people responded on this story and how Nation has done it from day one to this date, of course right now it's taken a bit of a calm, but it's still alive. What's your opinion?
I think the DCJ story was and has been so sensitive because of the nature of the person who is involved at the center of the story. But I think because we are in a new space, so to speak, in this so-called fight against corruption, and trying to figure out, you know, what the big fish versus the middle-sized fish versus the little fish. And so in the process, kind of walking around how to handle that. So I think there was some surprise. I remember seeing that headline myself and wondering what's coming. And there was a big setup. And I think that was very deliberate on the part of the paper to create this sense of, you know, something big is coming.
Yes.
But reaction-wise, I think now the problem became the questions that arose about the arrest itself and all the things that went around it, and how the paper or the media house then decides how are we going to handle this extremely sensitive, moving parts story that keeps changing around upon us.
Yes.
And I think sometimes there was a sense of, you know, we go with what we have, and we just deal with what we have as we go along with it.
Right. And you've talked about breaking stories and getting some of the hot reactions depending on how big a story it is. From what you followed to the reactions of this story, what's your opinion?
I think, Mark, from the beginning, that's Monday and Tuesday. And actually, those stories, actually, that is what good journalism is all about, breaking stories, so that people can know what is happening, other than trying to report what happened the following after it has happened.
Yes.
Actually, if you read Mutuma Matthew's opinion, that's what he was trying to say, that given the changing times, given the dynamics in the industry right now, we also need to find a way how we can also tell the stories that are not being told.
Yes.
So on Monday and Tuesday, actually, Daily Nation did a very good job, fantastic job, trying to tell Kenyans actually what is happening, the investigations that are going on. And I think Kenyans had an issue of the headline that was, I think, on a day after arrest, when the Deputy Chief Justice actually arraigned in court. I think the headline was about the fall of Deputy Chief Justice.
Yes.
And I think that's where now the problem started, because it was like on Monday, Daily Nation got it right. On Tuesday, they also got it right. So probably people also thought that maybe on Wednesday, after she had been arrested, Nation was going to get it right, because when she was to be on that day, she was to be arraigned in court. And maybe the editors and the journalists didn't know that the other side, maybe her defense was going to go to court actually to block her prosecution.
Yes.
And actually that's where the problem actually
You're
was
talking
began.
about this headline, how Mwilu finally fell. This was on
Exactly,
Wednesday.
yeah. That's where now there's a lot of criticism. That does it mean that actually Nation knew very well that she's going to that's what's going to happen to her on when she had been arrested. So, but on Monday and Tuesday, when they said that the top judge to be arrested, the following day, I think that they did happen. So I think the problem was on the third headline, where the Nation probably had predicted that she was going maybe to be prosecuted, but it didn't happen because, again, given that it's a legal process, there are usually a lot of challenges and pitfalls that probably could have stopped that.
Does this come in any way to you as conclusive, this headline, how Mwilu finally fell?
Yeah, Mark, you know, this this headline created a lot of reactions from many quarters.
Right.
And I actually have three things to say about that headline. Number one, that headline was written within a context that arose last year when the Supreme Court made a decision about the outcome of the election, and some politicians went out to rant about revisiting some issues or revisiting some things. So clearly, in some quarters in this country, the judiciary appeared to have been marked. That's one. Two, the other concern was whether this story, this investigation, quote unquote, was it a journalist-led investigation or it was an agency-led investigation? Were Nation reporters and editors investigating this story, or were Nation reporters and editors being fed this story by an agency that was investigating it?
But is there anything wrong with having a source?
Well, of course, there is nothing wrong with having a source.
Even that close, yes.
I have not said that there is anything wrong with having a source. It's always good to have a source, because without a source, then how are you even a journalist? So there's everything right with having a source. It's just that sometimes how you use the material given to you by a source is what matters. Because you see, an agency-led investigation has its own motivation and interests. A journalist-led investigation seems to have motivations and interests that are parallel to those of an agency-led investigation. So it would appear the people who look at the context in which the judiciary has been set aside, has been marked, and look at the way the Nation did this story, and even at some point finally appeared to hear and determine the case and write a headline, how Mwilu fell, was a cause of a lot of concern. So in some quarters, the Nation was seen as serving some interests other than those of the media.
Okay,
the journalism.
Henry, as from what he's raised, do you share the same concerns? Because it's something that Mutuma did write here in the piece, and I'll read it out just in response to what he said.
Yes, I think day one and day two, Nation got it right, as Eric has indicated, but they got it right on a half story. There was no full story. And that's where perhaps again Douglas comes in, because fair reporting of information events, sources and their stories involves sifting, weighing, evaluating the information with an open mind. But here, Nation seemed to have had a source inside the office of the DPP or the DCI, and they were taking verbatim what that source was telling us. So at a certain point, I asked myself, is Nation open-minded? And is Nation aware, for instance, a few months ago, we had other Supreme Court judges who faced nearly similar allegations. What happened with them? So in understanding that context, where did we see a headline to know his fault? Yeah? Even when an inquiry, a commission of inquiry was just about to be set up.
Yes.
So you begin, to me, there was a sense that there wasn't fairness in that coverage. But two, that the source was leading the journalists into the guillotine. And so journalists were doing a conveyor belt thing. The source needed this information out to prepare the country for the action they were going to take. And here we are, following or preparing
In your
the
view,
ground.
this is no scoop to have that.
There was no scoop, because the scoop would have told us things that DCI and ODPP haven't said anything about up to now. That if you notice, once Haji gave his statement in public, there is nothing Nation told us that Haji hadn't said.
All right.
And I think that make Mark, where you also need to be careful, because if we look at the story as it was reported by Nation Day 1 and Day 2, there is nothing that actually was contradicted or that was falsified by the DPP when he had a press conference. So it means that from the beginning, actually Nation actually had got it right. And as an editor, sometimes when you get this very sensitive information, sometimes you do not want to interfere with it. And this you want to put it as you have been given as it is, given right that you are getting it from.
But
that is great.
I think that is where the problem is.
That's why we
because that information is at your discretion.
Yes.
To weigh it like Maina says, and sift it to suit the public interest, not to suit certain interests in a certain corner. Because you see now you are saying that. The point is you don't want to meddle, you don't want to tamper with that information because it would displease, it would make some people in some quarters.
No, I'm not saying that it's not going to please someone. What I'm saying is that when you have given information that actually the matter is still under investigation, sometimes why you don't want to interfere with it. If you want to interfere with it, sometimes it might also, you might get off the story.
Yes. No.
So you put it the way it is.
Eric, I doubt that. What I believe is completeness, what I believe is fairness, is in every story you're covering, you must have all competing perspectives. It is a unique Kenyan set of journalism that we sometimes have complete perspectives, but we choose to run with one and save the next for a future edition, which in itself is problematic when you are thinking about journalism. But two, the reason as to why I'm talking about open-mindedness is that one source has an interest.
Okay.
And if you do not weigh what I think in journalism would be called pacificatiously, you're looking at it from a reporter's perspective. What are the issues here?
And I think
are they fact?
He points.
Can I hold on to them?
I'll let the lecturer break down the big word that I don't remember it from class, but yes.
I have no idea what it means. But I just wanted to add to what is being said here, and I think that is a notion of a healthy dose of skepticism, that you're not just receiving information, even if it's a strong source, even if they're telling you something that you think is important and in the public interest. I think there is a thinking about what is the agenda here. Am I going to be used by this agenda, or am I using this particular agenda to tell the bigger story? And what's a more important thing? I think that is a problem that is.
From your perspective, is there any problem with this headline here? How Mwilu finally fell?
I am uncomfortable with it, to be very honest.
Fallen. She might not fall at all.
Okay.
And in the long run, if Mwilu turns around this case, because I would have thought, and that's why I'm saying this is incomplete, if Mwilu's story is premised on a bank that collapsed, Nation has not run any complete story around what was happening with that bank.
The bank, yeah.
Okay.
I think that,
I'm using the word complete, Eric, and with all due respect, is that if we followed that argument, and here we have a situation where she had sureties which have been discharged without following due processes, and Nation was more inclined into helping the country, into touching where this problem is.
Okay, Eric, then I want to read something.
What I wanted to say is that I think there are two issues here.
Yeah.
Like I said from the beginning, I think Nation got it right from day 1 and day 2, and they were able to actually prove that, and it happened that actually Mwilu was arrested. And I think the problem actually began when they did the headline we are talking about. I think that's where the problem is, that from day 1 and day 2, I think we must give the credit to journalists who actually on this story were able to break this story. Then I also want to say that if you look at the story of Imperial Bank, personally I've edited stories of Imperial Bank here using different platforms of the nation. We've done so many stories of Imperial Bank, and actually that was proven right when DPP said that these are the charges that actually are facing Mwilu. So from there, I think we should separate the two.
Okay.
The breaking of the story from day one and day two, and actually the headline we're talking about that actually came the third headline after the nation had got it right from day one and day two. Because like I said, probably the editor had anticipated that Mwilu was going to be charged the following day, that day when the headline actually appeared.
Yes.
And actually that's why we got it wrong. But from day one
and
and
she was
day two,
charged.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and from
she was charged.
Yeah.
So
then from day one,
falling.
From day one, I don't think if she was charged, because I think because they were able to stop that, and our prosecution were able to stop.
They're back in court on October 9th.
So exactly. So what I'm saying, from day one and day two, I think from there, we have to agree that actually the nation was able to break the story.
Let's listen
but
to
as the story progressed, maybe
Yes.
that's where maybe they could have lost focus on the story.
Let's listen to what Mutuma Matthew, the executive editor of Daily Editions, wrote in this piece, and you should read the full part of it. Few people in their right mind will put their lives, reputations, families, and future at risk just to help a reporter. So some might do it for altruistic purposes, like honestly fighting evil, but you have to pray for over many years to get one. The competent reporter strikes a balance between the interests of his story and being used by his sources to advance their agenda. The ideal situation is where the reporter is skillful, and this is the last column here, the reporter is skillful enough to convince the sources that he's using the reporter, while in actual fact, the reporter is exploiting the resource for his story. And that's how they broke this, because there has to be some sort of balance. They're giving you some information, but then you have to break it in a way that is objective. And he ends by saying, in his view, what changes and, well, let me just read the last para. Yesterday was a beautiful day. There was no conflict in my spirit. What changes and preserves our world is not dishonesty, greed, and cowardice. Sometimes it is honest effort, the humble courage and moral clarity of a good reporter. And the nation, thank God, is still full of them.
I think Mutuma makes a very sensible argument there. There's no issue somebody can take with that,
yes.
with that sort of argument. But I think he makes that argument when he's pretty angry. He makes that argument because of the comments, the floodgate of comments that had come about during the week.
Yes.
And I don't know what Mutuma means when he refers to some people as hordes of keyboarders. Who are those? Who are hordes of keyboarders? I think that's a bit condescending.
Yes.
And even patronizing.
The title here of his
so I thought maybe he did a good job, but he did it when he was angry.
But I mean, we can't,
And he's entitled to have
of
anger.
course, yes.
But he is also entitled to listen. Yeah. In as much as he's entitled to be angry on comments that come, he's also entitled to listen to why are these comments coming through. And to avoid to think through those comments,
yes.
trivialize them, call them mercenaries or hordes of people who don't think, is in itself professionally a challenge.
But I will tell you,
yes. I would expect
yes.
that he uses those pages
to
interact with readers.
Yes.
And readers give comments, and he needs to come back and ask himself, why are they saying on day one we got it right? On day two, we got it right. On day three, we didn't. Yeah? And ask himself. He arrived at a conclusion. And that conclusion, Erick began by telling us that a good editor reads the story. When you look at day three, where are those facts that have enabled Nation to arrive at a headline, Mwilu
false?
They are not there.
Okay.
And so to be naive and say anybody who's saying there is something wrong here is not well schooled, doesn't understand how to balance and keep sources and how to keep public interest is condescending. And we all understand, and I understand the hard balance act that editors and journalists ought to go through.
Right.
But if we've already moved from that level of presenting a range of competing perspectives into arriving at a singular narrative,
yes,
a singular perspective, then that is good in an editorial. Is that?
Okay.
But if you've decided that it's going to be on a news page, I must see what supports it. If it's not there, then you're being naive.
All right.
Real
quick, and then we take a break.
The hordes of keyboarders, because I think this is the classic, new journalism versus old journalism divide. And I think this really speaks to how the so-called traditional media is having to come alive to the idea that there are other people who break stories, there are other people who can get information.
Yes.
You may not do it in the same way that these guys do, but that pressure is also coming not only from the so-called fourth estate, which is the traditional media, but now there's another estate in the form of, Kenyans on Twitter and, other people, the so-called hordes of keyboarders.
Yes.
And they are making a contribution as well. Maybe not in the same way that the nation will be able to do, sustaining an argument day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, but contributing to the debate. And I think it is this idea that there must be divergent opinions. And the divergent opinions may be the establishment media, such as Nation Media Group, and then there may be the hordes out there. But the hordes are doing something as well. And that contribution should not be minimized, it should not be trivialized. And there should be an understanding that it is complementary. It is not competitive.
Okay. There's now something else that it also has the element of sources and how we use our sources. The big story of the week, and that is the murder of Sharon Otieno, and it involved our very own reporter, Erick Odour. We'll get to hear his perspective on the story and how he carried it forward, and where things are right now and how we should anticipate moving forward with this story. Stay with Press Pass. Welcome back to Press Pass, and now we're getting into more of the issue of intimidation of journalists and the stories that happened this past week. And even today, as late as this evening, this afternoon, police arrested reporters Irene Mugo and Lydia Nyawera. This is their picture, and this is a story on the Daily Nation online page here. And just to appreciate that, first of all, the update on this is that both Lydia and Irene have been released. They were only held for about an hour. And the reason that police held them was that apparently they were taking pictures within a restricted area that is a police station. They were both interviewing this young lad who was arrested not too long ago, actually on Sunday, because he is said to have had a t-shirt that was written Kieleweke at a function of the deputy president at a church, actually the Gekondi Catholic Church, Mukurweni in Nyeri County. And this young lad was arrested for having a t-shirt that had a message that is said to be against the deputy president. And these reporters were arrested for having covered this and were asked to delete the photos and the videos that they had there. And they were not charged. There were no charges against them. Neither were there any charges against this young lad. Initially, he was arrested for causing disturbance. I'll start with KUJ as the Kenya Union of Journalists. What's your position on this latest incident, and is there something that you're going to pursue on this?
I think, Mark, these are some of the things that have been happening in this country, and this is where you get some overzealous police officers who probably they purport to be acting on behalf of other people out there. And I think journalists are also being sucked in the debate of Deputy President William Ruto's presidential ambitions and those who are against those ambitions. And the problem comes because these are the police officers actually who are involved. Then you want the investigation to be done. The investigation will also be carried out by the same police officers. Then you want prosecution to be done. Then you go to the DPP. Then the DPP will tell you that, first of all, you are still waiting for the file to come from the police. These are the issues actually we pursued. We've even gone to the office, we even written to the DPP asking for action to be taken against such police officers. But they will always tell IG that please help us with this file so that we can see if there is actually sufficient evidence to prosecute journalists first. If they can't prosecute journalists, then we also complain so that action can be taken against police officers. Then again, DPP will tell you that he's liaising with IG's office so that action can be taken against the same police officers. So the problem is police officers actually are the people who are violating the rights of journalists. It's the same police officers who are supposed to arrest police officers. So that's where the circus is.
Yes.
Yeah.
From your, from what you see, just the face of it, what's your reaction to this, Douglas?
Well, the impression I get, not just from that particular case, but from several other cases that have happened in the recent past and a while back, is that seems that the media space is shrinking. Space for freedom for expression is shrinking quite rapidly, and is a cause for concern because Kenya, within this region, really is one of the countries that people look upon in terms of the freedoms of expressions.
Very vibrant.
Yeah, very vibrant media and so on and so forth. So we get a little bit concerned when these cases become multiple in number and nothing yet is being done about them.
Right.
So I think maybe it should take a proactive approach by organizations like the one Erick heads, Maina, and all these other institutions that deal with the protection of journalists to really take this issue very seriously, because sooner or later we could be talking of a bit more serious issues beyond this. Yeah.
And Henry, I know you'll give us a bit of the figures or what you've been following from around the region, but Daktari, just a quick response to what you've been seeing play out. Does it scare your students when they see this happening to people they want to be like soon?
Well, to be honest, I think we are finding that our students don't want to do the hard stuff. Now they want to do the cotton candy kind of thing, because cotton candy doesn't get you into trouble.
Yes.
But unfortunately, if we want to attract people to do this hard stuff, and the hard stuff needs to be done, then I think you've got to allow an environment in which it is not a problem to follow a story that is difficult. And I think these delicate egos and delicate things that happen, that you can be arrested over something where it's, be it an overzealous police officer or other interests, it ultimately actually hurts the democracy itself. It is not even just about the journalist. It is the nation that suffers. So I think we would want to attract people into the profession, but if you shrink the space, if you make it seem that even the smallest thing no one can cover, then we are hurting ourselves, and we shouldn't do that.
All right. Henry, from even a regional perspective and what's been happening in the late
I think there's a big challenge. Kenya is fast retrogressing, and I wouldn't agree with you that because they've not been charged, they've been released after an hour, it looks like it's okay. It's not okay. One, there isn't a law that says you cannot take a picture in a police station. There is a law that says you cannot aid a person who is being accused of a crime. But police stations are supposed to be open so that whatever happens there is lawful. But if you begin by saying you can't take pictures there, then you can begin to envisage violations happening in a police station. Two, it is not a crime to put on a t-shirt that has a message. Yes,
it's not public disturbance.
They can come up with all these colonial relic things that says public disturbance, you are vagabond, and all those things. But those are laws that existed before we were independent. They cannot be applied in a 21st century where you're saying you want people to compete on ideas as opposed to all other reasons. Three, there is a big concern here that in this case, as in many others, that police are beginning to be partisan, politically partisan, and therefore they protect the mighty. They don't protect other Kenyans. If journalists are choosing to protect other Kenyans, because in this situation, perhaps the young man was not even booked purely because journalists took his pictures.
Yes.
If he were not, the journalists were not there, then there was a high likelihood he may have been tortured. There's a high likelihood he may have been prosecuted tomorrow. So, as Daktari puts it, you begin to see in that incident, if all journalists had been cowed not to be there, then we are not a democracy. You will have one group of people having their way and trampling over all the others. And because you can't have a voice, they will criminalize you if you raise your voice at all.
Right.
And those are challenges. Kenya is fast joining other countries that have been far off. Such incidents happen in South Sudan. And we say they are in transition. They are struggling. What do we say in a country that has been democratic for this long? That a shout in a public, I had said, if somebody has a message, why don't you just let the person display their message, and they turn out to be a minority, and they will be booed by the others. You don't need to arrest and beat them up.
Yes, and because actually we need to move on to the next focus. The reason, what you've just brought up in itself, by trying to cover up this story, by trying to silence or keep this young man, behind the scenes, they've actually brought the story to the fore because it's gotten this attention, and it's just undone their efforts there and brought to the fore some of the fears in that region politically. So the story lives on even if you try to cover it up. Speaking of something else that's been a lot of focus and a major focus, the story of the brutal murder of 26-year-old varsity student Sharon Otieno, who was 7 months pregnant, is one that has captivated the nation. And it's a story that first broke with the escape of Nation journalist Erick Odour from captors who later went on to brutalize Sharon, with whom he was abducted. Over the weekend, Erick spoke to NTV on the ordeal, how he met Sharon, how they found themselves in a life-threatening situation, and how he managed to escape. Tonight, we hear from Agre Mutambo, the Nation newspaper bureau chief, who came to Odour's rescue in concert with their colleague Justice Ochieng.
I thought they could not execute her.
A police officer in Kendu Bay calls us and says that they have our reporter who is visibly injured and who says that he had escaped from a speeding car where he'd been kidnapped with another lady. And so they say they had given him some first aid treatment, but they feel he needs some urgent medical care, and they invite us to go and see him. So we left Kisumu that very hour and headed to Kendu Bay, which is about 70 kilometers from Kisumu. So it was an hour's drive, and when we reached there, we found Erick. He had bruises in the knees and in the arms, and he didn't have any other physical injuries, but the bruises were very deep and inflamed. I was surprised because Erick had not received any death or threats from anyone. I understand politicians sometimes could complain about our coverage and demanding their right of reply, which is normal in the work of journalism, and we used to give them that right of reply. So my first thought was maybe it wasn't related to his work. Maybe these were people just who were kidnapping him for ransom or something, the usual criminals. So we picked him up and headed to Kisumu and took him to hospital. But as he narrated the story to us, that's when we started understanding that it was related to his work, which he himself had admitted that there was nothing that indicated he had stepped on toes, because he said he was contacting every subject involved in that story to give their account. This was a strange happening to us because politicians routinely attack journalists in public functions. They insult, they urge the public not to consume their product and so forth. For us, that's the kind of threat we had been used to. So the idea of threatening a journalist with death or kidnapping had not happened to our journalist before. The police should dig deeper into this, and if it was related to the way Erick was covering this story, then it could set a very bad precedent if the culprits are not punished, so that it becomes a deterrence to everyone who plans to injure or harass or harm the journalists who are covering stories.
Agre Mutambo's perspective there on what they did to help one of their own, that is Erick Odour, who had been abducted but managed to escape. At the face of it, I just want to give your initial reactions before I'm told I need to take another break. But in your view, is this a story, unfortunate as it is about Sharon Otieno, and we will pursue it to the very end to get to the truth. For you, in your view, is this a case of intimidation of a journalist?
Well, first of all, before I even say anything, I think I just want to express my very sincere condolences to the family, and even to say that the coverage of this story has been very disturbing in the lurid details of her death that are repeated over and over, the reported or alleged assault. And there are some details there, the multiple, stabbings, and you just think, surely, we had this the first time. There's a family that is dealing with grief. There's a lot of stuff going on. Must we hear these, gruesome details continually? I think that's been one of the most discouraging things I've actually heard about this story. And even in its coverage, I would just want to say a person is entitled to dignity even in death.
Okay.
So having said that,
yes.
The question on the sourcing of this story, I think that was the question.
First of all, if for you it looks like a form of intimidation.
On the face of it, yes. Without any other details, on
Yes.
the face of it, yes. But I would want to know more.
All right.
Beyond this.
I'll hold you on that point because we would want to discuss further about telling the story as it is, and being sensitive to the family, being sensitive to the public as well. What's your response in how it's played out, Erick?
I think this is a matter that, first of all, we must blame police for this, because when this matter occurred, actually it was brought to my attention actually 30 minutes after it happened. And actually, Barak had actually, according to what he told me, he had reported this matter to a police station. So we are expecting that once this matter was reported to a police station, the police ought to have sent a signal and start the search, and to ensure that there are efforts to rescue Sharon, which from what we've heard so far, we've not heard any from police that there were efforts to rescue Sharon.
Because she was found Wednesday morning.
Yeah, she was found. But this is a matter, actually, it happened around 9 to 10 on Monday.
Yes.
And actually on Monday when I was going to bed, actually we have already known what had happened, and actually we are coordinating on how we could rescue Barak from wherever he was. And from there, we actually were able to even talk to a police officer where Barak had actually went there to report the matter. So we're expecting that when this matter was reported to police ought to have actually started a search just to see if they could rescue Sharon from that particular point. So because I know there have been stories about that we as the media, we ran to rescue one of our own and probably forgot that Sharon was also supposed to be rescued. But I can say from the beginning that this matter was reported to the police, and we expected the police ought to have swung into action immediately to see if they could rescue Sharon. So I'll leave it at that.
At that, for this.
Mark, this is a truly gripping story. Sometimes you lack words to express yourself, the magnitude, the scope, the depth of the tragedy. I mean, for the family, for Kenyans, it's shocked everybody, and it's completely unbelievable, callous and despicable. Most brutal form of murder. So me, I'm happy with the way the media has covered it. Of course, there are concerns, like Mwalimu is saying, about the content, some of the issues that keep being repeated. But I'm happy, and I would like to urge the media to stay with this story.
Yes.
Until it is resolved. This is one story that we cannot afford to tuck inside, or to, in terms of bulletins, tucking it down way below. The media must stay with this story.
Right.
Yeah, and something must be done about it. Let's reach a conclusive end to this story, at least for once.
Okay.
Yes.
For you, Henry?
Quite unfortunate that a young Kenyan has been killed in this manner, but for me it's not surprising. It happened, it's callous, but it tells you how Kenyans regard life. It's increasingly beginning to be easy for us to talk about deaths as if they are statistics.
Right.
We are sweeping extrajudicial killings, either by people known or people unknown, under the carpet. In other countries, every effort would be put into place to ensure that we put a stop to such killings. And for me, I'm a bit disturbed knowing that a few years ago, Francis Nyaruri, a correspondent in the Nyanza region, was equally abducted and found killed, his limbs cut off. And you begin to see that this is being taken to be a norm. Yes. It is okay, we can forget. And as Douglas puts it, we must find a way of staying onto this story. Right. But the sensitivities, I think, I agree with Daktari that perhaps the government pathologist misled us when he decided to give his autopsy report in public. And therefore, as journalists, we all fell to the idea, if he has come out with such detail, who are we to try and clean it up? But the truth is that he owed the family to give them that report. Yes. in private. And the rest of the details, he could have passed them to police officers for purposes of being able to come up with probable directions.
A skeptic would say doing that would cover the truth.
No.
And in the interest of this story,
it wouldn't. He would still have come out and told us in summary. Without, that's what they've done all along. In fact, I would tell you that where senior people have been murdered and they've been post-mortem, we've not had such details. And I'm willing to go on record. Let's find out where senior people have been killed. Where do we get these minute details about what happened to them? So in that process, I feel for the family, and I say there was a problem here. The government pathologist went into too many details that were not necessary for purposes of getting information about her death in public. Yes. That set of information could have been given to the sleuths who are pursuing this. But because we fell for it as journalists, we have repeated it without going back to our basics. Remember, our code of conduct requires something of us. So I'm not saying don't say anything about that report. I'm just saying what information is sufficient for purposes of keeping the story alive without all these details that we have repeated for the umpteenth time.
Should we have probably phrased it as badly mutilated body, or she was stabbed several times?
Yeah.
Without...
I think Mark, if I may jump in there, I think what Maina is trying to say is he has a point, but as a journalist myself, I think there's a problem with balance. The media is trying to strike a balance.
Right.
I think, to capture the magnitude of that brutality.
Yeah.
To shock the public, to tell them this is how bad it really was. That must be told. But then again, now there is the family. And then these gruesome details, repeating them over and over again. In a way, it traumatizes them.
So told once, yes, with such detail is fine. And we understand at that moment, you've been able to move the entire country to understand that this is not just a mere death. It happened in a gruesome way, and all of us must remain on it. But the repeating sessions, what does it serve?
Okay.
If you ask yourself as a journalist, what is it serving?
I think what media is trying to say is that, this is a serious matter. Yes. And what we are trying to do is that to make sure that we give as much information as possible to the public. Because again, as we speak right now, we are told that only 2 suspects have been arrested. Michael Oyamo and the former MCA. So I think what the media is trying to do is also try and give as much information as possible. So if this can help to us to get who planned and actually who executed this lady.
Okay. Yeah. But I guess they're looking more at the sensitivity for the family and the people as we tell the story.
Yeah, sensitivity of the family. I think we must also see, I think from what I've seen in the mainstream media, actually stories that are professionally processed. I believe that actually journalists have tried as much as possible to give accurate information. Okay. Then I know on social media, that's where now the problem is, because there are a lot of stories and the pictures that are all over.
And then we're challenged to come up with the true version of it, and then we'd have to clarify, and that's where the details come in. So it's quite a balance there. But you've said at the face of it, it looks like intimidation of a journalist, at least looking at the aspect of Barack Odour, and you'd need more details, which we will get as we hear his side of the story after the break. back. Until a little over 3 weeks ago, Nation journalist Erick Odour was just following up a story of love gone sour. Former civic leader in Homa Bay contacted him, telling him he had a story about a relationship involving Migori Governor Okwatch and 26-year-old, the late Sharon Otieno. Now, Erick Odour revealed to Brenda Wanga the finer details of a kidnap incident that ended up with a death and how he escaped death by whisker.
Came to know Sharon was about 3 to 4 weeks ago. That one could qualify to be a month ago. I was in my workstation within Homa Bay town. This particular person called Lawrence Muller. Lawrence Muller is a former MCA of Kanyadoto. Kanyadoto is a ward within Homa Bay County. He came and told me that he has a friend who wants my help as a journalist. This is the first day I interviewed Sharon. On this day I took several of these photos, and I took photos of WhatsApp conversations. So I asked the lady again, so you've brought all this, you have all this evidence. When did the governor supported you last financially, because you claim the governor has abandoned you? She told me about 2 to 3 weeks ago, the governor gave me about 100,000 shillings. Then I told her, that the governor has not abandoned you, because if somebody gave you 300,000, if somebody gave you 100,000 about 2 to 3 weeks ago, how does that one now result to abandonment? She said, no, you do not understand how the governor was treating me. This matter of 100,000 and what was nothing. I could get any amount I wanted from the governor. I could even cheat him, I'm sick. He could give me even 200,000 to 300,000. She played for me her recording. The recording was between the governor and her. They were speaking in vernacular. The governor was pleading with her to do an abortion, and she was hesitant. The governor was telling her, no, if you want to be a good girl, you should just do what I've told you. I'm going to give you money to ensure that you have done abortion. You know, I'm a big person, I cannot endure such kind of shame. Somebody called me around 10. The person identified himself as the governor of Migori. I asked him, where have you gotten my number? He told me, see, I've gotten your number from my friend. Then I asked him, are you aware of this lady called Sharon? He told me, yeah, I know her. Sharon claims that she's pregnant because of you and you've abandoned her. She told me that that is a matter I can neither agree or deny. He told me that particular lady wants to blackmail me with the pregnancy matter. And so because of that, all this matter you will be dealing with through my personal assistant. Sharon told me that the governor of Migori, Okwatch, through his personal assistants, Michael Oyamo, wants to meet us. We went with Sharon to Rongo Town. On reaching Rongo Town, I suggested that we have a meeting at a hotel called Grasha. Then we saw 2 men standing by the roadside. Sigari ka park sideways. Venye amefungua tu mlango hivi, mtu mmoja akaingia pali pake venye alikaa next to Sharon. Mtu mwingine akakuja akanishongeza forcefully hivi, akafunga mlango, gari ikatoka. Gari ikatoka few meters, ndio akasema, they started with me eti, funga simu yako. These guys had weapons. And the other guy who was sitting next to Sharon was asking her, how have you known this guy? And the co-driver was saying, you guys have ever wanted to see the governor. We are taking you to see him. You will not need to get worried. Those ones were the last conversations before I jumped out of the moving car. When the vehicle went some meters, they stopped. The 2 people who came was this person who was next to me. Alitoka nje na yule co-driver. Yule jamaa alikuwa na Sharon ni kama alibaki tu naye kwa gari. They came running towards me. Alafu nikamka ndio nikakimbia. I thought they could not execute her. Huh?
Very sad tale there from Erick Odour, and from what you've heard, there's a bit more detail given by him, and clearly there was an attempt at least to cover whatever story that was being pursued here. I don't know what you see from your point of view.
Well, first of all, it's a very gripping story. I mean, I've listened to this a couple of times, and even now I'm listening to it again. And it's a very compelling human story. I think the details of it, you know, it's also a very one-sided story. Okay. And it's one-sided in the sense that we're only hearing from one person describing what happened. So that's why I'm saying I would want to know more. I want to kind of withhold judgment. But yeah, there is a sense that if it is as this young man has described it, there's something very worrying about that situation, about the sense of am I free to pursue this story, and at a certain point has this story become very dangerous because of some of the details that are given. But I would want to say this was a fairly extensive clip where you're only hearing from one person, and they've mentioned quite a few other people, and there are certain allegations being made. Has there been right of reply, and so on? That's what I would also want to know.
That other side of the story.
Yes, just that other side of the story.
Okay, yes. There's something here that Brazil Musumba says, the question that begs an urgent answer is what role did the reporter play, if any, to save the victim? His story doesn't completely add up. There are just too many holes in his narrative. But you just explained 30 minutes after the incident what happened.
Yeah, like I said, 30 minutes after the incident, this reporter actually went to a police station. Yes. Where he was given a phone which he used to call his colleagues and his family just to inform them of what had happened. So we expected that police ought to have actually swung into action at that particular point.
Because as he was reporting this case, he also said about
exactly
Sharon.
What he must have, although I haven't seen the OB what but we suspect that given of what happened and what he has said, he must have told the police actually the whole story of what was happening so that police could have helped. But I believe that the details, like what Mwalimu is saying, we expect that we are going now to find that from police at the moment. Yes. Because now it's police actually who are supposed to carry out investigations and interview anybody who has been mentioned in this particular story so that we are able to get the whole story. Looking at what has happened in similar stories that have been done by the media, Maina has said that Nyaruri's body was actually found in the same forest, Kodera Forest. Actually, that's where the body of Citizen Weekly reporter Nyaruri was found some years back. And looking at other stories that have been carried by the media, there are two things that have happened to those stories. Either those people who have been mentioned, especially people of the caliber of the governor, one, what they have done, there are those who have decided to go to court to seek legal redress. But there are also those who have actually resort to intimidation and harassment of the reporters who have done the stories. So there are two things that also could have happened here. Maybe the governor and everybody who was mentioned in this story was not happy with this story, and therefore they wanted to intimidate the journalist and probably also to eliminate it altogether, so that this story is not told. Or maybe wait when the story has been done, also give his side of the story, because you look at what Barak is saying. He's saying that he got this story. Then he reached out to the governor so that he could get the governor's side of the story to have a balanced story. So when the story is finally published, because I believe it was going to be published by the Daily Nation, it's published by the Daily Nation, it has the side of the narrative that he has been given by Sharon, then also the right of reply from the governor who was also being accused in this affair. Then he has the balanced story. But it didn't happen. So from what happened, we suspect that now whoever was giving the story probably was not comfortable with this story going out with or without his comments, and therefore could have also planned to eliminate or to ensure that this story is not told altogether.
And it doesn't see the light of day.
Exactly.
Which again it has. When you try to cover up the truth or story, it actually comes out even 10 times stronger. As a reporter, if you put yourself in his shoes, given the details that are out there in the public for, how would you have handled this story?
Thanks, Mark. I think I want to say something different, and there are actually two things. One of the things is, at what point does this story become a public interest story? And I'll tell you what point.
Okay.
The main thing really is that listening to Barack, he comes across as a very young reporter.
Yes.
Who's still growing in the trade, learning the ropes. And he's talking about this story as he has been investigating it. Now, what I learned from him is that there were no rules of engagement. And one of the things you want to set out as an investigative reporter is the rules of engagement with the subject you are investigating.
Okay.
Now, you establish something called an initiative, and you stay with that initiative. Apparently, Barack didn't establish an initiative, and he did not stay with that initiative. I'll tell you why. Because when you are doing an investigation, the subject or the object of your investigation does not set the venue for your meeting. You don't agree to that. And even if it does come to that, then both parties must agree that this venue is conducive and that we can meet there.
Okay.
Now, Barack agrees to a venue that has been set by the person he is investigating, or rather representing whoever is investigating. So they meet. Of course, he already has Sharon's side of the story, which makes me wonder why Sharon is still in the party, because he's just looking for the other side. Does he need Sharon with him? But that's beside the point. Now, my point is, Barack then allows himself and Sharon to get into a vehicle.
Yes, well, there's one that they were bundled into.
Yeah,
yes.
Whichever way they were bundled into. He has now lost the initiative. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
He has now lost the initiative, because from then onwards, he has no control whatsoever of what happens, including his jumping. He must be terribly lucky to be alive, having jumped. And then now, eventually, what happens thereafter is that a murder happens. Now, as an investigative reporter, my experience, which I'd like to share on this forum, is that you do not allow yourself to meet characters like this in a dark alley or a dark corner. Your place of meeting must be in the public.
Right.
Then number two, I wonder, as Barack was doing this story, whether he was in communication with his more experienced and senior editors in Nairobi or Homa Bay or wherever they are. I'm beginning to get the sense that he wasn't, because he has no guidance whatsoever on how he should proceed with investigations. Okay. And this is really tragic. And for me, eventually, it will have to call for a policy decision by media owners to begin to look at counties as really big and no longer just places where you put anybody, a correspondent, ill-trained, ill-equipped, no resources, no basic skills in dealing with a story like this. Because if we don't do that, we are going to see very many of these cases.
Right.
That's my point.
And Eric, in a bit, as we conclude, you'll be able to tell us whether there are any guiding policies when we're handling such stories. But Henry, there's that aspect of accountability then, as a lesson learned, that there wasn't communication continuously with any other colleague or editor to track what you're doing and the progress in a story. In your sense, is this something that is important in any form of investigative story?
Not just in any investigative story, in any journalism that is serious. You need to either say, okay, I might not tell everyone, but my editor or any other colleague who is a confidant must know and be aware of who you're meeting, where you're meeting them, and why. And what I find strange, I think, listening to Agri, you noticed he didn't say anything about a story that Barack was pursuing.
Initially, he didn't know this was related with the story.
Yes, he even says that Barack had not witnessed or seen any threats in the recent past, which in itself is not true, because Barack was among journalists that were threatened after the speaker's election in Homa Bay County.
Yes.
And he was threatened. So already that tells you there was a breakdown in communication between the ranks within nation. And that's already a fissure like that begins to allow anyone who is desirous to injure one party, they know that you don't have as much backup, and therefore they can deal with you single-handedly. But the second part is asking ourselves, I have thought through this, and it's quite unfortunate that Sharon has died, but earlier on I asked what was the public interest story Barack was pursuing. I've listened to him again and again, and I haven't seen the story.
Yes.
In all fairness, it is a story that is interesting to the public, but it has no public interest until Sharon is found dead. And therefore, that already tells us something. As journalists, when do we detach ourselves from the story and ask ourselves the big questions? Because if we had asked the big questions, then perhaps he would have known that I'm not able to detach myself enough.
Okay.
Somebody else needs to step in and help me pursue this side of the story that I'm not able to get.
All right.
The third thing is, as he has said, is collegiate thinking. So if Nation has more reporters, and for sure it has people in Migori and other colleagues in Homa Bay, how do you manage to go for such sessions by yourself? Of course, it's with hindsight. Most of the time,
yes,
when bad things happen, that's when we get to think about this. But the reason as to why I remember Nyaruri's case in 2009 was a similar situation, that Nyaruri left nearly 5 or 6 other colleagues and said, let me rush and see this source. It's an exclusive. And that was the last time he was seen. So as journalists, I think we need to be aware that there isn't a story worth our lives. And we need to increasingly understand that if you're feeling threatened, you need to pull back, you need to tell colleagues, you need to share the risk and begin to say, how do we manage this? But if the story has a public interest,
yes,
not just it is interesting to the public, because it
two
has
different things.
Those are two different things.
Yes. Now, in conclusion, because we have to wrap it up, I'll ask you first of all if you think, from what you've seen, if this is a public interest story. It has been revealed that there were threats towards Sharon initially to try to get her to abort, and if not, this is her mother admitting this later on. So this coming from someone senior apparently, is this something that is of public interest?
I absolutely think it is, though I agree that the scale of public interest increases with the death. But there's something almost soap opera-like about this whole business, where there's a prominent personality involved, there's a younger person who gets caught up, and then sadly it ends in a brutal death.
Yes.
So yes, there is public interest, because now the question also becomes who is involved and why and for what purpose. And there's a certain point at which even taxpayer money is entering the picture. So yes, there is some level of public interest. Okay. If I may just say a quick thing, because of what my colleagues there have said, and the idea of how the institution of the media house is so important in supporting the individual in the media house. And already research has shown that to be ethical in your practice, you shouldn't be left to be ethical by yourself out there. The institution should also support you so that you're not forced to make unethical decision making.
Yes.
So I think in this same regard, even with investigative work, that you should be supported at a certain level. And these far-flung or away from Nairobi situations where we are seeing that it is the correspondent, the person far away, who may likely be unprotected, who ends up going to cover some of these stories far away from institutional guidance, far away from the umbrella of institutional resources. Perhaps institutions can look into this a little more and consider it an important question, that even in the counties, those have become other centers.
Yes.
And in those centers, how do you take care and ensure that things go as they should?
Right, and there's something else that's being discussed as we tell this story further, and that is public opinion and how we can easily shape public opinion. And I'd just like to draw the attention to what the DPP had to say earlier, and he was throwing this at the politicians whose views are heard because we carry them on our air, whether TV or radio, and even show them on the papers. And he had this caution to give the politicians. This is some, actually, we'll start with what the politicians had to say and what the DPP had to caution on.
These people, we should hang them, tie them on a tree somewhere in Nairobi National Park so that they are eaten by wolves and eaten by hyenas. Hata kama ni nani akiangai, nobody deserves to die like this.
Postmortem inasema Sharon alidungwa visu mara 6, akadungwa mtoto tumbo. Kwa hivyo mimi nasema DPP, Nurdin Haji, Kinoti, wacheni kucheza na Wakenya walio wengi.
Let me tell you the truth. Oyamo and those other suspects will not be sacrificed. They are the people who committed the murder, yes, but they are people who sent them to commit the murder. I'm praying that tomorrow we are not going to see some of those small, helpless boys being brought to court and whoever sent them is not with them. We will not accept that.
Let's not speculate. Because again, if you speculate and if there's a lot of public pressure to get it in a certain way, then we are also, it's just the same as it's mob justice. Investigations sometimes take time, you have to be patient. You cannot expect for us to have answers and to prosecute immediately a murder occurs. There is a process. There is DNA to be looked into. There are several theories that have been put forward. Those two have to be looked into. One thing that I want to assure that we have no sacred officials that will be left. Whether you're a governor or not, you'll have to face the law to the fullest extent.
Is there a problem with us carrying the politicians' views on this sensitive story as investigations continue?
I think there can be some tempering of some of these comments. I mean, some of the things that we've just heard, honestly, because they are going to be edited. I think some remarks are probably going to inflame and not help the conversation. This is a delicate situation already. So I don't know, some comments I felt were very uncomfortable.
Okay.
And I would probably edit them out. It's good TV, for sure. But is good TV sufficient when there are bigger things in play? And don't forget, we are a country that has come from a post-election violence situation. We know what inflaming the populace can do. So I would say let's be very careful.
Okay. And in terms of policy, do we have any policies that guide such reportage on such stories?
Mark, first of all, I will say that yes, this was a public interest story. You know, we are talking of a governor, somebody who heads a county and a number of sub-counties. And we also talk about integrity and leadership. But this is and I'm saying this from the information that we got from Barack, that the governor was asking the lady to procure abortion. So basically, if you have a governor actually who is now advising and actually involved in infidelity in office, then advising the people involved so that they can procure an abortion, obviously that becomes a public interest story. Having said that, it is true that most organizations, and even from our end as KUJ, when we are training journalists in safety and protection, you cannot just go to such a story without informing your editor and even your own peers. Like Maina said, sometimes there is suspicion. And actually, now during our trainings, these correspondents who are also working under a very difficult environment, they say sometimes they fear sharing information with editors, because sometimes editors end up working with the people whom they are reporting about. True. So they keep these stories to themselves. So if they do not want to share this information with the editor, it's better they share with maybe the colleague, or go with the photographer, or probably share with someone else.
So that actually someone in the know.
Yeah, someone actually who knows that yes, Barack went to meet so and so. But I'll also defend Agri Mutama, because when this matter was actually brought to my attention, the first person I called in Kisumu was Agri, and I asked him, are you aware where your reporter Barak is? And he said, yes. I talked to Barak at around 6 p.m. Then I didn't go into details. I told them, okay, fine. If you talk to him at around 6 p.m., this
on
is
the
the
evening
development. Yeah, on that day when it happened, because it happened around 10. Yes. So when actually this information was passed to me, I called Mutambo asking him if he knows where his reporters, because Mutambo is in Kisumu, Barak is in Homa Bay, quite some distance. Yes. So he told me that yes, I talked to Barak at around 6 p.m. But let me call and find out. But I told him that before you call him, this is information that has reached me. So I don't know whether Barak had, when they talked around 6 p.m., whether Barak had told him what he was doing. That one, actually, we didn't go into details. But all in all, what I'm saying is that when you are going out, especially at night, because it's something that was happening at night, it's good to share with someone else, just to get to know that this is what I'm pursuing. So in the event that there is a distress call, actually there is someone actually who is able to help.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we keep telling this story, there are politicians who want to talk about it. Should we black them out?
A bit of it. I mean, it's a strong sentiment, really. I would be challenged to really come out clearly on how to handle that. Perhaps I would cross that bridge when I come to it. But having said that, I think as an investigative reporter myself, or once an investigative reporter, this is what I want to share with media houses and reporters. It's important that stories are pitched and approved, because then the media houses are involved, you know. Sometimes off the cuff here and there you get tips and have to do stories. But the most important thing is, the question is, what information do you want?
Okay.
Who has that information? How are you going to go about getting that information? Mm-hmm. And what are the potential risks involved in getting that information? Those questions need to be answered. But finally, my comment would be that I urge my media colleagues to stay with this story until it comes to a reasonable conclusion, because this is not the first murder we have seen.
Yes.
There was a murder in a county, a death in a police cell. There was a murder of a university student on Wayaki Way a while back. It wasn't resolved. Now this is just another murder. So counties are becoming a really big deal. And media houses should upscale their presence in counties.
Yes.
And see how they can reinforce whatever staff they have there to do a better job.
I hope they're listening. Hopefully they're awake still. Henry, your last comment as we wrap it up.
It's a tough thing, and I hear what colleague Eric is talking about, that Agri had talked to Barak, but I didn't see it coming out in Agri's backstory today. But the truth is that now there is public interest. But in listening to those two, there wasn't sufficient public interest. We just need to see that there was some salacious story that could have unraveled either way, depending on how the planning and the thinking was getting through. Do we believe that the recording that had been shared, if Barak says he wasn't too close to Governor Obado, and somebody says here is a voice of him saying this, are you able to immediately arrive at a conclusion that it's him? You know, so there are many questions to that, because there could be very many people today, people even mimic other people's voices. So as an investigative journalist, you don't arrive at such conclusions as fast. And that's why I was talking about competing perspectives. What's the interest of Sharon bringing you into this private life at that moment? What is the interest of this MCA, former MCA, who has brought this to your attention? As a journalist, there is also a big challenge in how Barak dealt with sources. You know, the biggest challenge in this story is source confidentiality. And we must be able to think and speak to it, because it's the currency that any journalist takes to the bank. If your sources' names are going to be thrown around with ease like that, then the story was not going to be in the long run. And so I'm disturbed. I know that Barak needs protection. I urge Nation Media Group to try and give him counseling, social support now. It's not an easy thing. It's going to be a long haul. But for the politicians, I would have expected as a journalist to ask them another question. Those that say the boys, can they record a statement and say more than they know beyond the cameras? You know, so if we are all interested in getting to the bottom of this story, we need to ask the politicians that have come public to equally record statements and say what they know about this case. So we are all conclusively seeking to get to the bottom of it, and those responsible are duly sanctioned, so that in Kenya, a human life is not equal to a chicken that people just slaughter and forget, and the next day there's this happening. Because this country is turning out to normalize brutality, to normalize murder. And very soon we would not be able to just keep the country, because young people are beginning to think it is okay to do this.
Right.
You know, so when we grew up, it was bad to fight and let somebody bleed. It warranted people being beaten and warned. Here is murder, which the country sometimes treats casually, and we begin sometimes victimizing the victim twice.
Right.
You know, now we are asking untoward questions over the
relationship
and I think we need to all be sensitive. We need to all remain aware that this could be our own. If it were our own, would we be behaving the way we are behaving just because it's somebody else's daughter?
Right. And as the Masharia says, so many questions on the matter. It will take time to know the truth, and the truth is something we will pursue on this particular story. Today, Michael Oyamo, who was in custody, was denied bail, and he's back in court tomorrow. And Bernardo Juang will be following this story up, and we'll definitely have it as one of our top stories, and hopefully take in what we've been advised here by people who've been investigative journalists. And wherever Barack Odour you are, I believe you are safe and you are well, which is what the Nation Media Group will make sure that you are safe. That's it for this discussion, but I just want to get into the international radar, and we'll be taking a look at how coverage has been done on the current president and the previous president. That's right, we'll be taking a look at the American media, which, just like its Kenyan counterpart, have been accused of partisan and unbalanced coverage, particularly on President Donald Trump and his administration. And you would be the judge of whether you think this has been unfair on Donald Trump. A survey done and published by Harvard University shows that President Trump received at least 80% negative coverage from the media in his first 100 days in office. This is higher than the percentage attained by former President Barack Obama, whose press coverage was 60% positive and 40% negative in the first 100 days in office. Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush also received a lot of negative coverage in their first 100 days at about 60-40 ratios. But while the Trump figures may seem high, the media has defended itself, saying that all it did was to debunk quote statements and media spins from the president and his staff. Trump, on the other hand, has termed the media as fake and the enemy of the people. Some critics hold the view that the American press lost credibility on what they say was its superficial coverage of scandals under President Obama, like administration's decision to allow illegal sale of guns. Well, you'll be the judge on the coverage of the same. I'm sure you know the coverage here has warranted us the name that is, people saying gazeti ni ya kufunga nyama. Well, I hope you'll be grabbing your copy of the Daily tomorrow. A lot of stories you can anticipate from that. Dr. Wambui, thank you so much for your time and your views. Erick Odour, a story that we'll keep following and getting responses from the people who are affected by this directly. And Douglas Okwatch, thank you so much for your views as a former investigative reporter. Good work you're doing at the Chinese Global Television Network. And Bwana Henry Maina, keep us on toes, as you always do. Thank you for your views, and thank you to the team that makes this possible. My name is Mark Masai. Have yourself a good night.